So I'm actually launching in with a case study from my new project that I just started here at the Woolf, which explores the Jewish music-making world in Victorian England and its networks of amateur and professional musicians who connected it with broader Victorian musical culture. Leonora Braham was a prominent Jewish soprano, and her personal and professional life spans multiple networks, making her a really good example of the kind of work I'm trying to do.
Do you want me to sit down?
If that's all right,
maybe keep my right fixed.
That's the next slide, thank you. So Leonora Braham is most famous for being one of the original members of the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company at the Savoy Theatre, where she created 5 principal soprano roles for Gilbert and Sullivan in their operettas, including most famously Yum Yum in the Mikado in 1885. She actually came from a family with a very active involvement in Jewish and synagogue life in Britain. I've highlighted names of her family members just so you can see how some of the names sort of trickle down the various generations, and this is something to bear in mind for later. Her professional music making started at the West London Synagogue in 1869, where she was one of the very first soprano choristers. Ironically, she only ever reached the role of third soprano, which was a non-solo role, considering that she went on to be a principal soloist with an operatic company. She resigned this post in 1874 to have her theatrical debut with the German Reed Entertainments, which was another light operatic company. And this is the first sign of her shift away from Jewish family life to the world of professional music making. You can see in the latter half of the 1870s and early 1880s, she sort of undergoes extensive vocal training, principally at the Royal Academy. She meets her non-Jewish first husband, Fred Barnes, who was also a musician. They moved to Canada. She moved back from Canada 2 years later after her husband died very young. And then she solidified her career as a light operatic artiste with the D'Oyly Carte. Amongst this biographical information, one of the most surprising and actually fruitful links I've discovered is a connection between Leonora Braham and a semi-renowned Victorian authoress called Dinah Craik, who you can possibly see. She actually funded Leonora Braham's tuition at the Royal Academy. Have the next slide. So Dinah Craik seemed to be a bit of a socialite as well as an authoress, and her diaries and letters indicate that she took Braham under her wing, introducing her to singing teacher William Cummings, whose letter from Craik you can see on the left. So you can see I've highlighted some of the aspects of the letter which reference Braham's Jewishness and what this might mean for her as a performer. They also reference her father not only being an observant Jew but also relatively poor. And there's a suggestion that actually Braham was held back professionally by this. And I really like the final cryptic sentence, which I don't know if you can see. When I tell you the whole story someday, you may have done a better deed than you think in listening to Braham and sort of encouraging her as a professional singer. There is some suggestion from Craik's diaries that she had a hand in matchmaking Braham with her husband, Fred Barnes, and there's a slightly sad reference in that top entry. I wonder how it'll all be 20, 30, 50 years hence when actually he only died 4 years later. Those final 2 entries referencing Braham in Craik's diaries initially confused me quite a lot, particularly this reference to Mrs. Eddowes, whose home Fred Barnes and Leonora Braham got married from in 1878. And also the reference to, at the bottom here, Leonora being left with 2 babies after her husband died, when I only knew of one baby, who was her son, Frederick, also Frederick Barnes. Thank you, next slide. I've attempted to map out the various personal and professional connections within Leonora Braham's life, plus a few other little details, so mainly the ones that I've addressed today, based across 3 overlapping areas of her life: the musical aspect, the personal, and the Jewish. And what we get, if we can have the next slide, is a bit of a mess, really. So the layout definitely needs refining, but hopefully it kind of demonstrates the number of networks involved in trying to put all these things together. I've again highlighted the family names involved just so you can see where they fit. It's really interesting to note that there's a real lack of Jewish connections, with the exception of other Jewish musicians at the West London Synagogue, who also undertook careers as professional singers. Dinah Craik is pretty prominent as not only linked to Braham but various other institutions and people. And I managed to work out who the Eddowes family were. They were a wealthy Liverpudlian family, Stanton and Annabella Hort Barnes. And it's really interesting that you can trace their names down into Leonora and Fred's children, Annie Hort Barnes and Frederick Stanton Barnes. So this is a real contrast with the Phillips and the Victors that you got in one of the earlier slides, which are the family names in the Leonora Graham's family. In fact, the reason that there was very little information about one of these children was that actually Annie was adopted by the Eddowes family after her father's death in 1880. This is something I fairly recently discovered, which suggested to me that actually Graham's family was unable to maintain 2 children on her return to England. And perhaps also she was trying to give her daughter a chance at a life that she didn't have. I also wonder whether the Eddowes family replaced Graham's own family as a sort of parental figures linked into wealthy Victorian society, which Graham aspired to, although despite her success never actually attained. So there we are, it's a snapshot of Graham's life, and I'm going to conclude with pictures of Shirley Henderson as Leonora Graham in the film Topsy Turvy, made by Mike Leigh in 1999, which was a film about the creation of the Mikado in 1885, making her probably the only synagogue chorister to feature